Across the river, the fog had gathered into a shape. But this wasn't drifting. It was turning. A slow, horizontal twist in the air, like the river had somehow lifted itself out of the water and begun spinning in the fog. The sound of the river faded. The bank beneath his feet felt farther away. And whatever that thing was across the water, it seemed to be pulling his attention toward it. For as long as I can remember, I've been collecting stories that don't fit. Ghosts, UFOs, strange creatures, glitches in reality, the unexplained and the deeply unsettling. For decades, I've sought out these stories, listened to the people who experienced them, and written them down. I'm Scott Weimer, and this is The Ghost Collector. This story was told to me by a friend who heard it directly from the man it happened to. That man's name was Bobby. Bobby was a big, tough guy. He lived for a while here in Central California, and he was the kind of guy you noticed. Big, over 6 feet tall, solid, not loud in a fake tough guy way, but just built like someone who had no reason to be nervous walking into a bad situation. If trouble started, Bobby wasn't the person looking for the door. He was the person everybody looked to see how serious things were about to get. So when Bobby told this story, that's what made it stick. It wasn't just the story itself. It was the fact that he was still bothered by it. This happened years earlier when Bobby was living up in Alturas in the far northeastern corner of California. If you've never been up there, it doesn't feel like California most people picture. It's not beaches and freeways and palm trees. It's high desert, pine-covered mountains, long, lonely roads, and wide open country that starts to feel almost empty once you get far enough away from town. Alturas sits way up near the Oregon and Nevada borders. From there, you can drive in different directions and very quickly find yourself in country that feels older than anything around it. Places where the road narrows, the towns thin out, and the landscape starts to make you feel like you are very small. One day, Bobby and a friend decided to go fishing along the Klamath River. It was a drive, a couple of hours, maybe more depending on exactly where they went. Bobby was never completely clear about that location, or maybe the person telling me the story just didn't remember the exact spot. But it was somewhere along the Klamath, in that broad northern part of California where the river cuts through remote country and the land has a different feeling to it. They weren't doing anything unusual, just a couple of guys getting out of town, driving out to fish, probably talking the way people talk on a long drive when the day is still normal and nothing has happened yet. They found their spot along the river and split up. Not far. They could still see each other, or at least they had the sense of where the other one was. But they were spaced out the way fishermen do, a few hundred yards apart, giving each other room along the bank. The river was moving steadily. The air had that quiet, damp feeling you get near water. There was fog hanging in places, not a heavy wall of it, but enough that the opposite bank looked softened and partly hidden. The kind of fog that shifts slowly and makes the distance difficult to judge. Bobby cast his line and settled in. And for a while, nothing happened. At some point, Bobby looked across the water and noticed something odd in the fog. At first, it was probably easy to dismiss. Fog does strange things, especially near rivers. It collects in low spots. It moves in layers. Wind can pull it into shapes that seem almost alive for a second before they dissolve. But this didn't dissolve. It held together. Bobby kept staring at it because it didn't look like normal fog anymore. It had a form. Not a person. Not an animal. Not anything he could name. It was more like a shape within a mist. A swirling place. Almost like the fog was folding into itself. The description he gave was that it looked like a tunnel. Not a tunnel in the ground. Not an opening through trees. A tunnel in the air. A horizontal whirlpool made out of fog. And once he noticed it, he couldn't stop looking at it. That was the part that seemed to bother him the most when he told the story later. Not just that he saw something strange, but that looking at it changed how he felt. The longer he stared, the harder it became to look away. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was like his attention had been caught on something. Like part of him was being pulled across the river before his body ever moved. He could still feel the ground under his boots. He could still hear the river. But his mind was drifting toward that spinning shape. He didn't describe it as a voice. He didn't say it spoke to him. He didn't say it wanted him to come closer. It was more like pressure. Like the shape was pulling at him. Not physically, exactly. Mentally. Deep in the center of his head. The way you feel when you're about to fall asleep and your thoughts start sliding away from you. Except he was standing upright on a riverbank in the middle of the day. He tried to break his focus. He couldn't. The fog kept turning. And the more it turned, the more the world around him seemed to fade. The river was still there. The bank was still there. His fishing pole was in his hand, or near him, or wherever he had left it. But all of it became less important than that movement across the water. Then everything went black. Not gray, not blurry. Black. The next thing Bobby remembered, he was on the ground, flat on his back. He opened his eyes and he was staring straight up into the sky, confused. For a moment, he didn't understand where he was. You know that feeling when you wake up from somewhere unfamiliar and your mind has to rebuild the room around you? It was like that, except that he was outside, on the riverbank, and he had no memory of lying down, no memory of falling, no memory of deciding to lay down on the riverbank. He sat up fast. He looked around, trying to get his bearings. The river was still moving. The fog was still there. But whatever shape he had seen was gone. Or maybe it had spread back out into the rest of the mist. He couldn't tell. Then he remembered his friend. Bobby turned and looked down the riverbank. A few hundred yards away, his buddy was getting up too. That was when the fear really hit him. Because his friend hadn't just been standing there watching Bobby collapse. His friend had been down on the ground too. He was pushing himself upright, dusting himself off, looking just as confused and shaken as Bobby felt. Like he had come back from somewhere without knowing where he had been. Bobby started toward him, or maybe just called out. The details get a little thin here, but before Bobby could ask the obvious question, before he could say, "Did you see that?" Or "What happened?" his friend said something first, and he didn't say it casually. He didn't say, "That was weird." He didn't say, "Are you okay?" He simply said,
"We need to leave."
Then he said it again, or at least made it very clear.
Now.
There was no debate. These were not two jumpy people frightening each other over a noise in the bushes. These were grown men, men who had driven hours to fish, men who had no reason to pack up because the fog looked funny. But neither one of them argued. They gathered their things, fast. I don't know if they left anything behind. I don't know if Bobby even remembered reeling in his line. What came through in the story was the urgency. The feeling that whatever had happened was not something to investigate, not something to stand around and compare notes about. They needed to get away from that river. They got back into the vehicle and drove. And for a long time, neither of them said much. That detail feels true to me, because when something frightening happens, people don't talk right away, especially men like Bobby. You don't want to be the first one to admit how scared you are. You don't want to say what you think happened, because once you say it out loud, it becomes harder to take back. So they drove in silence. The road carried them away from the river, away from the fog, back toward regular life. But something about the day had changed. The fishing trip was over. The normal world was still there, but didn't feel quite as solid as it had that morning. Eventually, they stopped at a small roadside cafe. One of those little places you find in rural towns and along highways, where the coffee is always on, the tables are worn, and the people inside can usually tell you are not from there. They sat down and tried to make sense of it. Maybe that was the first place they finally talked about what they had seen. Maybe they kept their voices low. Maybe they were still trying to convince themselves it had been a trick of the fog, or some kind of fainting spell, or something in the air and in the river. But then an old man sitting nearby overheard them. That's another part of the story that stuck with me. Because according to Bobby, this man didn't laugh. He didn't ask a lot of questions. He didn't seem surprised in the way you expect a stranger to be surprised if two men were describing a weird collapse by the river. He just leaned over and said something like,
"You boys shouldn't have been fishing there."
That got their attention. The old man told them that the place they had been was not for them, not for regular people. He said that spot was for the local Native Americans. Bobby didn't remember the exact wording, or if he did, it didn't make it through the chain of people who told me. And I want to be careful here, because I don't know what tribe, what specific place, or what local beliefs may be connected to that section of the river. I don't want to invent that. But the message was clear enough. They had been somewhere they weren't supposed to be. Not because of a posted sign. Not because someone owned the land in an ordinary way. But because there was something about that place. Something known locally. Something respected or avoided. That Bobby and his friend had walked into without understanding. And that old man seemed to know it before they had even finished explaining. That was the end of the fishing trip. Bobby never got a clean answer. He never found out exactly what they saw, or why both men ended up flat on the ground, or what that swirling shape in the fog was supposed to be. He didn't know whether they had lost time. He didn't know if they had passed out at the exact same moment. He didn't know if they had even seen the same thing. All he knew was that he looked at something across the river, felt it pull at him, and then woke up on his back. And when he looked for his friend, the same thing had happened to him too. That was enough. Bobby was a big man, a tough man, a man who wasn't afraid of much. But whatever happened on the Klamath River scared him in a way that stayed with him. And years later, when he told the story, it wasn't with excitement. It wasn't with the energy of someone trying to impress people. It was quieter than that. More like someone remembering the exact moment he realized there are places in the world that don't care how strong you are. Places where you can step across an invisible line without even knowing it. And by the time you realize you've crossed it, something on the other side has already noticed you. Bobby never figured out what he saw across the Klamath River that day. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe there wasn't. But one thing I've learned from collecting these stories is that some experiences stay with people for years. Not because they're dramatic, but because they leave behind a question that never gets answered. The next story is much shorter. It happened in broad daylight, in a busy parking lot, and lasted only a few seconds. But the witness still remembers it clearly. It happened on a weekday morning. Nothing dramatic, nothing late at night. Just one of those ordinary mornings where I stopped for a breakfast sandwich on the way to wherever I was going. The convenience store sat on a busy road, right at one of those miserable intersections where traffic never seems to move right. The gas pumps, the parking spaces, the sidewalk, the street. It was all crammed together in this tight little space where backing out of a parking lot felt like threading a needle. I paid for my food and walked back outside, glancing toward the road as I crossed the lot. I was checking the traffic light, trying to decide which way it was going to be easier to pull out based on the current traffic flow. Nothing looked unusual. Cars passing, people coming and going. It was a normal morning. I got in my car, buckled my seatbelt, and started backing out. That's when I saw her. About 50 feet away on the sidewalk, just beyond a row of waist-high bushes, stood a woman. At first, I didn't think much about it. In that part of town, it wasn't unusual to see people near parking lots selling fruit, ice cream, flowers, or little homemade trinkets to get by. So my mind filled in the blanks. That must be what she was doing. But there was something about her. She wasn't calling out to anyone. She wasn't holding anything. She was just standing there, facing the store. And she looked incredibly sad. Not frightened, not lost, just deeply, quietly sad. I had this strange little flash of sympathy for her. It was already hot outside, and for a second, I imagined she was someone out there trying to make a few dollars, standing in the heat because she had no other choice. Then I turned the wheel, finished backing out, and pulled toward the exit. From the moment I saw her to the moment I reached the driveway, maybe 10 seconds had passed. She should have been right there on my passenger side. But when I looked, the sidewalk was empty. No woman, no cart, no cooler, no table, no fruit, no flowers. Just the bushes. And beside the bushes was a large roadside memorial. I hadn't really noticed it when I pulled in, but now I saw it clearly. Candles, flowers, handwritten messages, and a large photograph of a middle-aged woman who had been struck and killed in the roadway about a month earlier. I looked at the photograph, and it was her, the woman I had just seen standing on the sidewalk. And now I understand what she had been looking at. She had been standing beside the road, staring back toward the place where people had left items at her memorial, as if she was looking at the last proof that she had ever been there. Not every story in The Ghost Collector involves a ghost. Sometimes the most frightening encounters are with people. Living, breathing people. The kind of person you meet once and never forget. The kind of encounter that seems harmless at first, but grows stranger and more unsettling the longer you think about it. The kind of story that ends with one simple thought. I never want to see that person again. This next story falls into that category and is called In the Backseat. This happened in Antioch, California, sometime around 2 a.m. The person who told the story said he had been at a friend's house that night, tucked away in one of those quiet suburban neighborhoods where nothing bad is supposed to happen. They'd been drinking, talking, laughing, the kind of night where time disappears faster than you realize. His friend crashed out and he was left a little tipsy, but he was shuffled out of the door anyway. And when he stepped outside, he knew he wasn't okay to drive. He didn't feel comfortable asking to crash on the couch. Maybe he was embarrassed. Maybe he didn't want to be a bother. Maybe it was just one of those small, bad decisions that seemed harmless in the moment. So he went out to his car. The house was on a cul-de-sac. Quiet, dark, mostly still. There was one working street light way down near the rounded end of the street, but it didn't do much good from where he was parked. His car sat along the curb, away from the better light, surrounded by parked vehicles and darkened houses. He unlocked the door and climbed into the back seat and decided he would wait there until he sobered up. But sitting upright in the back of a car at 2 a.m. in a neighborhood you don't really know has a way of making you feel exposed. So he laid down, pulled some things over himself. Newspapers, a sweater, whatever was loose in the back seat. Not enough to be comfortable, just enough to make himself look less like a person and more like a pile of clutter. He told himself it was silly, and then he tried to sleep. But sleep didn't come. The back seat was cramped. The car felt too small and too dark at the same time. Every shadow inside it seemed closer than it should be. His mind started doing things what minds do in the dark, playing through every worst-case scenario. What if a police officer spotted him? What if someone drunk came around the corner and hit the parked car? What if a neighbor had seen him getting in the back seat? What if someone noticed him laying there? And then he heard it. Footsteps. Not close at first. Somewhere down the street. Slow steps on gravel and pavement, moving in his direction. He stayed still and listened. The footsteps would come closer for a bit, and then stop. Then come forward again, then stop. At first, he couldn't understand why someone would be walking that way in the middle of the night. Then a thought came to him. Whoever it was might be checking cars, looking inside them, one by one, testing door handles to see if he could find an open one to take what he could. One by one, the footsteps came closer. Another stop, another rattle, then closer, another stop. He could feel his body tighten under the sweater and the newspapers. He didn't move, didn't adjust, didn't even let himself breathe normally. The fear he felt was immense, because the footsteps stopped right beside his car, right beside the back window. He could hear the person breathing, wheezing. There was only a sheet of glass between them. The man in the car stared straight ahead at the back of the front passenger seat. He didn't dare turn his head. He did not want to confirm what was outside. Worse than that, he didn't want the person outside to confirm what was inside. Then a voice came through the glass. Soft, sing-song, almost playful. I see you. It was like a child playing hide and seek, but it wasn't a child. The voice belonged to a grown man. The person in the back seat did not move. He stayed buried under the clutter, forcing himself to become part of the mess. A sweater, a newspaper, a shadow. Anything but a man hiding in the back seat. The stranger walked around the car, slowly. The footsteps moved toward the rear. Then there was pressure on the trunk, like the man was touching it, maybe testing it, maybe seeing if the alarm would chirp, maybe seeing if the person inside would flinch. The footsteps continued around the vehicle. Then came the sound of the door handle, the rear door handle. The stranger pulled it once, then again, then several times. The man inside held himself completely still. Then the voice came again, closer this time, more strained, more irritated. I see you. This time it didn't sound playful. It sounded like someone trying very hard to make a hidden thing reveal itself. Then came the tapping. Something hard against the window. Metal, maybe? Or a rock? Or a key? He couldn't tell. He just stared at the seat in front of him while every part of his body screamed to move, to run, to fight, to do anything. But there was nothing he could do that wouldn't make the situation worse. If he jumped up, the man outside would know for sure. If he tried to get in the front seat, he'd have to uncover himself. If he opened the door, he'd be stepping right into whatever was waiting. So he stayed still. And then the stranger spoke again. This time the voice had changed. Lower, flatter, no longer teasing. My name is Poker Face. What's your name? That was the moment the man in the back seat stopped thinking of the stranger as just some drunk guy or some thief looking through cars. There was something wrong with him. Something deeply wrong. The man hiding in the car later said that he had already started imagining how it would end. A smashed window, a knife, a gun, a door forced open. His friend waking up the next morning to police lights and yellow tape in the street. But nothing happened. For a while, there was only silence. The kind of silence that feels worse than noise, because you don't know what's going on. Has the person left, or is he still standing there, watching? Then, finally, he heard the footsteps again. They were moving away, slowly, down the street. Growing quieter until the neighborhood swallowed them completely. But the man in the car still didn't move. He stayed in the back seat, hidden under the sweater and newspapers, long after the footsteps were gone. He waited until the first light of morning started to show itself. Only then did he climb into the front seat, start the car, and drive away, completely sober and wide awake. I tried to locate the original author, but haven't been able to. If this was your account, I'd love to hear from you and properly credit you. There's a certain kind of story I never get tired of. Creepy stranger stories. Sometimes it's a person you only meet once, a person you'd never understand, a person you're very glad you got away from. And that's what really the Ghost Collector is all about. These are the stories people carry with them, the ones they don't always tell at parties, or at work, or even to their own families. Ghosts, UFOs, strange lights in the sky, glitches in reality, encounters with people who felt dangerous, wrong, or not quite human. Moments where the world briefly stopped making sense. Some stories are terrifying, some are quiet, some are almost beautiful, and some are just strange enough that, years later, you still find yourself asking, what did I actually experience? If you have a story like that, I'd love to hear it. You can visit theghostcollector.com and submit your story there, or email me directly at scott@theghostcollector.com. Thank you for listening to The Ghost Collector. I'm Scott Weimer, and if you've been carrying a story you can't explain, maybe it's time to let someone collect it. Music and sound effects used in this episode were sourced from freesound.org and are licensed under Creative Commons Attribution. Full source details are available at theghostcollector.com. Thanks for listening.